Stepping out into the world of a massively multiplayer online role-playing game, or MMORPG for short, can be one of the coolest experiences for the budding gamer or the veteran gamer alike. With a few clicks of a mouse, one can enter a world full of adventure that is populated by fictional cities, characters, fantasies, real people, and things to do. We become part of a culture, exploring strange new places, leveling, questing, and participating in an unexpected new story designed just for you. Well, not exactly. MMORPGs are shared, and sometimes during the process, you've got to suspend your disbelief. Enemies magically respawn a few minutes after you kill them. If you escort a captured NPC back home, don't be surprised to find him reappear back in his prison cell for another player to do that exact same mission. You can even walk by enemies and not have them aggro even if they're staring right at you. Players accept the compromise on the promise that an MMORPG be so engrossing as to make those fallacies bearable. That's because being part of a game that has drawn you into its world can be one of the most collectively addictive experiences and make you feel part of something bigger. But it will cost you around $15 a month most of the time. MMORPGs are often defined by their size, taking the basic fundamentals of classic role-playing games and spreading them across giant worlds wherein hundreds if not thousands of players can coexist. You can complete a quest, you can fight people, fly, ride, walk, run anywhere you want. You can bump into someone who doesn't look very familiar, a la a member of an enemy faction, when you're out leveling. If you don't want to fight him, you can try to talk to him, although you might just see garble. Or you can find members of your own faction and maybe go to a dungeon or a raid to find treasure. The worlds of many of these games were some of the biggest, brightest, and most booming communities, conceived and made accessible by gaming's most imaginative dreamers. We thought they may last forever, but of course that's not the case. The gaming landscape has evolved greatly since these types of games reigned supreme, threatening to tear down their legacies. Today we'll look at a brief history of the MMORPG, and more importantly discuss the various factors that have led to its downfall. This is the death of the MMORPG, the old school style of making games that has one foot in the coffin. The MMORPG was built primarily as a game for people to play in a giant, constantly updated world, most of the time for a flat fee per month. The goal was to provide a persistent world that continues to function even when players log out and stop playing. This allows players to feel connected to a living culture and play whenever they want to. The MMO game started as text-based virtual worlds called MUDs, which stands for multi-user dungeons. These simple games combine elements of all manners of media, interactive, fictional worlds, online chatting, and Dungeons & Dragons style social role-playing. The objective of many of these MUDs was to go on adventures with friends and kill monsters, not ironically the same stuff you'd be doing in the future's most popular MMOs. But something was missing: visualization. Along came Meridian 59 in 1996, and the grandfather of the MMORPG, Ultima Online, released in 1997. For the first time, players from all over the world could come together as one community and interact, fight, quest together, and coexist in a single world. This was the same time that the PlayStation and the Nintendo 64 were at their most popular, and neither of them had connectivity for online video games. It wasn't until 1999 that the Dreamcast introduced the first online play, rudimentary as it was. And even then, the only game that even came close was Phantasy Star Online, which was a role-playing game, not a massively multiplayer online role-playing game. Meridian and Ultima predated what would become the most iconic legacy MMORPG ever be created. Of course, that game was EverQuest. Like World of Warcraft, EverQuest pioneered the MMORPG market by building bigger worlds and drawing in millions of players in total, with nearly 500,000 active subscriptions at its peak. The game was so popular, over 24 expansions were created. At one point, it was the fastest growing genre on the market, thanks to the popular upcoming World of Warcraft, although it was also this game that caused a great amount of polarity in the market. Leading up to World of Warcraft, many other great games tried their hand at the MMO, from EVE Online, Final Fantasy XI, Dark Age of Camelot, and more. But many of those games weren't exactly user-friendly. I'm looking at you, EVE Online, although you are pretty amazing. WoW's #1 achievement was to provide streamlined accessibility, something that was way overdue for the genre. Before WoW, the traditional MMO was often overly complicated, demanding and hard to learn, or extremely punishing. World of Warcraft cast aside crippling pain points like taking gold, experience, or levels away if a player died, forcing player grouping to complete mid or late game questing content, and the historical need to make every piece of content take an eternity. It removed the harsh barriers and stigmas attached to MMORPGs, a genre for the quote-unquote hardcore player with too much time on their hands. MMORPGs cannot be played by everyone, but WoW was probably the one game that probably could be played by just about anyone, and provided a fairly straightforward questing system that most players could follow. Its combat system was pretty easy to learn, yet had enough for advanced gamers. Things like having to manage rotations, maximizing stacking buffs, and creating custom macros. It was a game that hooked you pretty early and continued to give to you if you could stomach the very long questing road to level 60. It was here that the game offered you alternate forms of gameplay: dungeons, raiding, trade skills and farming, reputations, battlegrounds, PvP, lots of stuff to keep you entertained. Of course, all the while pursuing that next piece of shiny loot. It was that elusive purple item that everyone was after at first, and then the orange ones. The most successful MMORPGs provided incentives for both new players and veterans to coexist in the same world while doing different things. And boy oh boy did World of Warcraft actually do that. During its peak, it amassed 12 more million active subscriptions than EverQuest, leading it to be the most played game on the market at the time. In the years following its release, WoW basked in the sweet taste of success while competitor after competitor tried to mimic its identity, from Rift to Star Wars: The Old Republic. But like any genre, one template of gameplay will only last so long. Much of what made the MMORPG great in its heyday was that it was new. With EverQuest and World of Warcraft especially, there was a certain degree of excitement, simply stepping out into the world and leveling up. You felt part of a bigger world, and if you spent enough time in it, you could become a bigger part of it. A member of a community, to go questing with your friends and roleplay yourself as a wizard, or a rogue, or a big dude with an axe, or someone who walks around with a giant infernal following them. For a long time, this wanderlust permeated the experiences of many popular MMORPGs, but it wasn't enough to sustain them forever. Time has a way of changing our habits. Fatigue set in when The Old Republic came out in 2011, which was when World of Warcraft was sandwiched between Cataclysm and Mists of Pandaria. For a long time, the classic hotkey-style combat system was good enough, but definitely during this time we wanted some change. Rift introduced world events, which was a step in the right direction, but then failed to innovate on this archaic combat system. Gameplay mechanics were limited, so Guild Wars 2 tried to freshen it up by adding rolling, dodging, spell synergies, and didn't force you to stand still. The Elder Scrolls Online came in during this time as well, hoping that its brand would help ship copies. A certain degree of copycatting resulted, and we tired of the traditional WoW model after a while. We were getting older too, and couldn't justify spending 3 hours in a raid just to get the chance to have the item we wanted to drop. We needed more engagement after the allure wore off all those years ago. Plus, it was getting pretty damn expensive. One of the big problems facing MMOs in total was a pricing problem, as it turned away many gamers who could not fork over $15 a month. It also probably caused a reduction in total life cycle, as the pressures of continuing that monthly payment add up over time. Because if you play World of Warcraft for about 5 years, your total bill ran up around $900 to $1,000 for a single game. The irony, though, is that players spend more money in in-game stores anyway, allowing publishers the same return today or greater without having to rely on a subscription or costly development, and that's where things started to change. A subscription is a monetary roadblock to many, turning away many gamers before they can even have a chance to purchase the product. An in-game store, on the other hand, is accessible by anyone. Why pitch an expensive MMO today if you can make a cheaper, free, or smaller game and take advantage of more incremental revenue by an in-game store? Might as well shrink your scope, take advantage of buying habits across the world, all the while potentially having a smaller upfront cost and no subscription whatsoever. So as it was, the MMORPG was inherently doomed, as most players could only choose one game, which created another problem. It thinned out the opportunity for new MMOs to prosper. It shrunk the overall capacity for their player bases, as many gamers were never switching games in the first place. This is why the MMORPG market is so small and cutthroat. There simply was not enough players to go around for more than 1 or 2 popular games. So in the bloodied aftermath of battle, the remaining MMORPGs fought to compete for what gamers were left in an increasingly declining market. What resulted was the evaporation of the MMORPG altogether. They're not dead completely, but What's left of them is very little. Some would say that the MMORPG of today lost the magic of what made the MMORPG of the past what it was. The MMORPG today is making influences in other types of games. I believe that is the true legacy of this dying format. You could almost argue that live gaming today is nothing more than most of what an MMORPG already did, yet with an in-game store in place of the upfront subscription cost. The subscription model itself was downsized and converted into smaller bite-sized items, supplementing new feature content from many live service games. Many of these games also integrate the same ideas too, across the board: a shared world, repetition-style loot grinding, in-game economies driven by players, and a persistent game development that lays out content in stages over time. So while not many MMORPGs are made today, our culture still interacts with the influences of the MMORPG every day, even if they're playing a free game, a mobile game, or a game like Destiny, The Division, or the upcoming Anthem. Perhaps we simply have moved on from them, somehow now just too tired to ever go back to something so complicated, big, and demanding as a traditional MMORPG, or too smart to go back to that old-fashioned way of making a video game, when there are much less risky, more profitable, and easier ways to make the same amount of return today. Times have changed, and today's conventional video game designs have proven that maybe it's not the best idea to make such a giant game with a subscription service that demands so much of the player. A game that refuses to give convenience to our short attention spans, give us immediate satisfaction, and change the fundamentals of its own game design to suit contemporary palates. But you know what I'll say to that? Fuck that. MMORPGs are awesome.